We often employ intuitive processes when we make assessments and choices in certain situations. Those processes no doubt carry an evolutionary advantage when we had to decide whether a saber-toothed tiger was smiling because it was fat and happy or because it was famished and saw us as his next meal. But the modern world has a different balance, and today those intuitive processes come with drawbacks. When we use our habitual ways of thinking to deal with today's tigers, we can be led to decisions that are less than optimal or even incongruous. That conclusion comes as no surprise to those who study how the brain processes uncertainty. Many studies point to a close connection between the parts of our brain that make assessments of chance situations and those that handle the human characteristic that is often considered our prime source of irrationality, our emotions. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, for example, shows that risk and reward are assessed by parts of the dopaminergic system, a brain reward circuit important for motivational and emotional processes. The images show, too, that amygdala, which is also linked to our emotional state, especially fear, is activated when we make decisions to capture uncertainty. The mechanisms by which people analyze situations involving chance are an intricate product of evolutionary factors: brain structure, personal experience, knowledge, and emotion. In fact, the human response to uncertainty is so complex that sometimes different structures within the brain come to different conclusions and apparently fight out to determine which one will dominate. For example, if your face swells to 5 times its normal size 3 out of every 4 times you eat shrimp, the logical left hemisphere of your brain will attempt to find a pattern. The intuitive right hemisphere of your brain, on the other hand, will simply say avoid shrimp. At least that's what researchers found in less painful experimental setups. The game is called probability guessing. In lieu of toying with shrimp and histamine, subjects are shown a series of cardinal lights, which can have 2 colors, say green and red. Things are arranged so that the colors will appear with different probabilities but otherwise without a pattern. For example, red might appear twice as often as green in a sequence like red, red, green, red, green, red, red, green, green, red, 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 and so on. The task of the subject, after watching for a while, is to predict whether each new member of the sequence will be red or green. The game has 2 basic strategies. One is to always guess the color that he knows occurs more frequently. That is the route favored by rats and other non-human animals. If you employ this strategy, you are guaranteed a certain degree of success, but you're also conceding that you will do no better. For instance, if green shows up to 75% of the time, and you decide to always guess green, you will be correct 75% of the time. The other strategy is to match your proportion of green and red guesses and the proportion of green and red you observed in the past. If the greens and reds appear in the pattern, and you can figure out the pattern, this strategy enables you to guess right every time. But if the colors appear at random, you would be better off sticking with the first strategy. In the case where green randomly appears 5% of the time, the second strategy will lead to the correct guess only about 6 times in 10. Humans usually try to guess the pattern. In the process, we allow ourselves to be outperformed by a rat. But there are people with certain types of post-surgical brain impairment, called the split brain, that preludes the right hemispheres of the brain from communicating with each other. If the probability experiment is performed on these patients, such that they see the colored light or card with only their left eye, and employ only the left hand to signal their predictions, it amounts to an experiment of the right side of the brain. But if the experiment is performed so as to involve only their right eye and right hand, it is an experiment on the left brain. When researchers performed those experiments, they found that, in the same patients, the right hemisphere always chose to guess the more frequent color, and the left hemisphere always tried to guess the right pattern. Making wise assessments and choices in the face of uncertainty is a rare skill, but like any skill, it can be improved with experience. In the pages that follow, I will examine the role of chance in the world around us, the ideas that have been built over the centuries to help us understand that role, and the factors often lead us astray. The British philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell wrote, "We all start from naive realism, i.e. the doctrine that all things are what they seem. We think that grass is green, that stones are hard, and that snow is cold. But physics assures us that the greenness of grass, the hardness of stones, and the coldness of snow are not the greenness of grass, the hardness of stones, and the coldness of snow that we know in our own experience, but something very different. In what follows, we will peer at life through the eyepiece of randomness and see that many of the events in our lives, too, are not quite what they seem, but rather something very different." In 2002, the Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics to a scientist named Daniel Kahneman. Economists do all sorts of things these days. They explain why teachers are paid so little, why football teams are worth so much, and why bodily functions help set on the size of hog farms. A hog excretes 3 to 5 times as much as a human, so a farm with thousands of hogs produces more waste than neighboring cities. Despite all great research started by economists, the 2002 Nobel Prize is notable because Kahneman is not an economist. He is a psychologist, and for decades, with the late N.L.S. Tversky, Kahneman studied and clarified the kinds of misconceptions around this. I feel many of the common fallacies I will talk about in this book. The greatest challenge in understanding the role of randomness in life is that although the basic principles of randomness arise from everyday logic, many of the consequences that follow those principles prove counterintuitive. Kahneman and Tversky's studies were themselves spurred by random event. In the mid-1960s, Kahneman, then a junior psychology professor at Pew University, agreed to perform a rather exciting chore, lecturing to a group of Israeli Air Force fighting instructors on the conventional wisdom of behavior modification and application the psychology of flight training. Kahneman drove to the point that rewarding the positive behavior works by punishing mistakes does not. One of his students interrupted, vomiting an opinion that would lead Kahneman into epiphany and guide his research for decades. I've often praised people for warmingly for beautiful executive maneuvers, and the next time they do, always do worse, the flight instructor said. And I screamed at people for badly executed maneuvers. By that knowledge, the next time they improve. Don't tell me that reward works and punishment doesn't work. My experience contradicts it. The other flight instructors agreed. To Kahneman, the flight instructor's experiences remained true. On the other hand, Kahneman believed in the animal experience that demonstrated that reward works better than punishment. He removed on this apparent paradox, and then it struck him. The screaming preceded that improvement, but contrary to appearances, it did not cause it. How can that be? The answer lies in a phenomenon called regression towards the mean. That is, in any series of random events, an extraordinary event is most likely to be followed, due purely to chance, by a more ordinary one. Here's how it works. The student pilots all that had a certain personality ability to fight planes, raising their skill level involved many factors required in sense and practice. So although their skill was slowly improving through flight training, the chance wouldn't be noticeable from one new mover to the next. Any especially good or especially poor performance was thus mostly a matter of luck. So if a pilot made an exceptionally good landing, one far above his normal level of performance, then the odds would be that good that he would perform closer to his norm. That is, worse the next day. And if his instructor had praised him, it would appear that the person had done not good. But if a pilot made an exceptionally bad landing, running the plane off the end of the runway and into the corn chowder in the base cafeteria, then the odds would be good that the next day he would perform closer to his norm. That is, better. And if his instructor had a habit of screaming, "You clumsy ape," when a student performed poorly, it would appear that his criticism did some good. In this way, an apparent pattern would emerge. Student performs well, praise does no good. Student performs poorly, instructor confirms the lower part at high volume, student improves. The instructors in Kahneman's class had concluded from such experiences that their screaming was a powerful educational tool. In reality, it made no difference at all. This error in intuition spun Kahneman's thinking. He wondered, are such misconceptions universal? Do we, like the flight instructors, believe that harsh criticism improves our children's behavior and our employees' performance? Do we make other judgments when faced with uncertainty? Kahneman knew that human beings, by necessity, employ certain strategies to reduce the complexity of tests of judgment, and that intuition about probabilities plays an important part in that process. Will you feel sick after eating that luscious-looking ceviche tostada from the street vendor? You don't consciously recall the comparable food stands they paradise. Count the number of times you spent the following night guzzling Pepto-Bismol and come up with a numerous estimate. You let your intuition do the work. Research in the 1950s and early 60s indicated that people's intuition about randomness fails in such situations. How widespread, Kahneman wondered, was his understanding of uncertainty, and what are its implications for human decision-making? A few years passed, and Kahneman invited a junior professor, Amos Tversky, to guest lecture in one of the seminars. Later at lunch, Kahneman mentioned his developing ideas to Tversky. Over the next 30 years, Tversky and Kahneman found that even those among sophisticated subjects, when it came to random processes, whether in military or sports situations, business quandaries, or medical questions, people's beliefs and intuition very often let them down. Suppose 4 publishers have rejected the manuscript for your thriller about love, war, and global warming. Your intuition, the bad feeling, the pit of your stomach might say that the rejections by those publishers expressed in their research was not good. But is your intuition correct? Is your knowledge unsellable? We all know from experience that sold tosses of coin cup heads It doesn't mean that we are all tossing a two-headed coin. It could be that publishing success is unpredictable, that even though a novel is destined for the bestseller list, numerous publishers could miss the point and send those letters to say no thanks. One book in the 1950s was rejected by publishers, who responded with such comments as very dull, a dreary typical figure-beckering, petty notices into excellent emotions, and even if the work had come to light 5 years ago, when the subject, World War II, wasn't timely, I don't see that there would have been a chance for it. That book, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, had sold 30 million copies, making it one of the best-selling books in history. Rejection letters were also sent to Sylvia Plath, because there certainly isn't enough Joan Town for us to make notice. To George Orwell for Animal Farm, because it is impossible to sell animal stories in the U.S., and to Isaac Bashevis for Singer, because it's Poland and they wish to Jews again. Before he had big, Tony Hillerman's agent dumped him, advising that he should get rid of all that Indian stuff. Those were not isolated misjudgments. In fact, many books destined for great success had to survive not just rejection, but repeated rejection. For example, few books today are considered to have more obvious and nearly universal appeals than the works of John Grisham, Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, and J.K. Rowling. Yet the manuscripts that they wrote before they became famous, all eventually hugely successful, were all repeatedly rejected. John Grisham's manuscript for A Time to Kill was rejected. Drew 26 publishers. His second manuscript for The Firm drew interest from publishers only after a bootleg copy circulating in Hollywood drew a 600,000 offers for the early rights. Dr. Seuss's first children's books, And I Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street, was rejected by 27 publishers. And J.K. Rowling's first Harry Potter manuscript was rejected by 9. Then there is the other side of the coin. The side anyone in the business knows all too well. The many authors who had great potential never made it. John Grisham's, who quit after the first 20 rejections, or J.K. Rowling's, who gave up the first 5. After those many rejections, one such writer, John Candy Toole, lost hope of ever getting his novel published and committing suicide. His mother persevered, however, and 11 years later, A Controversy of Dune Senses was published. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and sold nearly 2 million copies. There exists a vast gulf of randomness and uncertainty between the creation of a great novel, or a piece of jewelry, or a chocolate chip cookie, and the presence of huge attacks to that novel, or jewelry bags of cookies at the front of thousands of retail outlets. That's why successful people in every field are almost universally members of a certain set of people who don't give up. A lot of what happens to us, success in our careers, in our investments, and our life decisions, both major and minor, is as much as a result of random factors as a result of skill, preparedness, and hard work. So the reality that we perceive is not a direct reflection of the people and circumstances that will divide, but instead an image word by the random facts and effects of unforeseeable and frustrating external forces. That is not to say that it really doesn't matter. It is one of the factors that increases the chances of success. But the connection between actions and results is not as direct as we might want to believe. Thus, our past is not so easy to understand, nor is our future easy to predict, and both enterprises will be benefit from looking beyond the superficial explanations. We habitually underestimate the effects of randomness. Our stockbroker records that we invest in the Latin American mutual fund that beats the plants off the domestic funds, fires running. Our doctor attributes that increase and triglycerides our new habit of enjoying a hostess ding dong with milk every morning and have to do if you feed the kids at breakfast and goes and not fact yogurt. We may or may not take our stockbroker or doctor's advice. A few of us question whether she has enough data to give it. In the political world, the economical world, the business world, even when careers $1 million are at stake, chance events are often consistently considered a combination of failures.
時は周りを見た方がいいですね。視野を自ら狭めているとしか言いようがありません。